The Wisconsin River is a Mississippi tributary, the state of Wisconsin's longest river, and can be regarded as Wisconsin's namesake. The Wisconsin River originates from the Lac Vieux Desert, which is not in fact a desert, but is actually a lake in both Wisconsin and Michigan's Upper Peninsula. After leaving Lac Vieux Desert, the Wisconsin River travels 420 miles southwest until it reaches the Mississippi River just south of Prairie du Chien. The history of the Wisconsin River is a long story that begins over several million years ago in the lower half of the river. The first piece of the river was the lower portion, which is much more narrow than its valley further upstream, although as time continued the rest of the river was formed after the Pleistocene, as the section between Stevens Point and Merrill became a route for the drainage of meltwater flowing away from the glaciers that cover the northern half of the area during the Wisconsin glaciation. While the glaciers continued to move further north, the river grew in that same direction. The river wasn't completed until about 15,000 years ago though, as remaining meltwater had flowed south of Stevens Point into the glacial Lake Wisconsin, creating a catastrophic flood when the ice dam holding the water in burst open, connecting the river between Portage and Prairie du Chien, while at the same time carving out the Wisconsin Dells, but that's for another video. With the river completely formed, the land's natives surely began to settle along its coast. It wasn't until 1673, when the French arrived in Wisconsin, that Europeans with explorers such as the French missionary Jacques Marquette and the French-Canadian explorer Louis Joliet had begun exploring the land. Among the explorers were 5 Métis, who are indigenous people who primarily inhabit Canada's 3 prairie provinces. It was those explorers who first documented the Wisconsin River in 1673. When Joliet and Marquette canoed from Lake Michigan until they reached the Fox River, where they traveled upriver until they reached what is known today as Portage in early June of that year. It was from there that they traveled downstream, eventually reaching the mouth of the river on the 17th of June. The name of the Wisconsin River was created during Marquette and Joliet's exploration as they met the Algonquin, who told the French that the river's name was Muscousin, becoming the river's first recorded name. At this point, I'm sure you're asking, why isn't it called the Muscousin River then? Well, French explorers that followed in the footsteps of Marquette had later modified the name to Wisconsin, with an O, eventually leading to it being re-recorded in 1718 by
Guillaume de Lisle,
when he wrote the river's name down as Wisconsin. That still isn't quite right though. Well, the reason it's now Wisconsin is because it was simplified again about a century later to its current name, with it finally becoming the Wisconsin River and the namesake of the state of Wisconsin itself. These Frenchmen had left, and the British had too after a short period of occupation. The Wisconsin River became American, as the present-day United States had won the Revolutionary War and had been given territory as far west as the Mississippi. It was in the early 19th century that industry began to grow along the river's shores, as logging companies started using it to float logs downstream from forests in the north to sawmills further south, in newer cities such as Wausau. Between the 1880s and the start of the 20th century, dams were constructed for multiple reasons, varying from logging companies damming up the river to make sure they could keep floating logs downstream, providing flood control, and eventually, even hydroelectricity became a factor. In the end, though, these dams created tourism for the river as it began to create reservoirs, such as Lake Wisconsin, for recreational uses. Today, cities and towns along the shores of the Wisconsin River include Byron, Boscobel, Brokaw, Eagle River, Crown and Water, Merrill, Merrimack, Mossany, Muskota, Nakusa, Oki, Plover, Port Edwards, Portage, Prairie du Sac, Rhinelander, Rothschild, Sauk City, Schofield, Spring Green, Stevens Point, Tomahawk, Wausau, Whiting, the Wisconsin Dells, and finally, the Wisconsin Rapids. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.